It starts with a clink of glass and a sentence that froze the entire table. It was during a wine tasting, not a romantic one. One of those neighborhood weekend events where the couples are a little too polished and the laughter's always a little too forced. The cheese was fake fancy. The wine was warm. The tension, though, ice cold. My wife raised her glass. Her eyes glossed with just the right mix of sarcasm and Chardonnay. She looked around the table, then stared right at me and said, "If I had to rate him in bed, I'd say 0. Or maybe -1, if that's possible." And then she laughed. No one else did. There was a silence so sharp it could have sliced through the prosciutto. My fingers locked around my glass, too tight. My ears burned. And across from me, her best friend Celine tilted her head, smiled, and said the one thing that should have never left her lips. "I want to check for myself." That was the moment everything changed. I wasn't just humiliated. I was activated. And I didn't know it then, but the unraveling had already begun. I didn't react right away. Honestly, I don't think my body knew how. The room kept spinning around that single sentence. "I want to check for myself," said in that tone, with that look. Everyone assumed she was joking, but I knew better. I'd seen that exact smile once before, at a dinner party 2 years ago, when she told Lyra she accidentally kissed her yoga instructor after too much sangria. Everyone laughed then too, but it wasn't funny. I looked at Lyra, expecting her to recoil, to say, "Celine, what the hell?" Or at least fake a frown. Nothing. She didn't even look surprised. In fact, she raised one eyebrow like she'd been waiting for Celine to say something like that. Like this was all part of the performance. The conversation moved on, but I didn't. I sat there with my heart cracking open behind a fake smile, nodding like a bobblehead while people talked about new coffee makers and someone's backyard koi pond. My face burned. My throat felt full of gravel. I kept wondering, was that rehearsed? Did they plan it? Or worse, was it some test? Later that night, when everyone finally left and the glasses were stacked in the sink, I confronted her. Quietly, carefully, like someone trying to disarm a bomb. "Why did you say that? About the rating? And Celine, what the hell was that?" She didn't look up from her phone. She just muttered, "God, Marek, you're still hung up on that? It was a joke. Grow up. You said I'm a 0 in bed. In front of 10 people. How is that a joke?" She rolled her eyes like I'd asked her to explain gravity. It got a laugh. It didn't. "Then that's on you, not me." I stood there, watching the reflection of myself in the window behind her. Small, hunched, pathetic. And then I asked something I didn't plan to say out loud. "Would you be okay if I joked about you like that? In public?" She finally looked up. Not with guilt. Not with empathy. With boredom. "I'm not the one insecure about my performance. Maybe if you gave me something to work with, I'd defend you." It felt like a slap, but colder. Because it didn't come from anger. It came from complete emotional detachment. Like I wasn't her partner anymore. Just a burden she hadn't figured out how to cancel yet. She walked upstairs, and I stood there in silence, fingers still gripping the back of a chair, heart thudding in my ears. I didn't follow her. I sat on the couch for almost 2 hours. Not watching TV. Not scrolling. Just staring. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Celine. Just 5 words. "You okay? You looked hurt." I didn't reply. Not yet. But that message? It didn't feel like kindness. It felt like the next move in a game I didn't know I'd been dragged into. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even go upstairs. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, staring at that message from Celine. 5 simple words. "You okay? You looked hurt." It wasn't just the text. It was the timing. The precision. The way it didn't ask if Lyra had gone too far. It assumed it. It didn't feel like comfort. It felt like an invitation. And at 3:12 a.m., against every ounce of pride I had left, I replied, "Yeah, just tired of being a punchline." 3 dots blinked. Then a pause. Then came her response. "You deserve better." Now, I'm not naive. I knew what that meant. And I knew how dangerous it was. But after months, maybe years, of being emotionally iced out, that sentence hit like a warm gust of air after being buried in snow. It was pathetic, I know. But in that moment, I didn't care. The next morning, Lyra barely spoke to me. She floated around the kitchen in her silk robe like nothing had happened. Poured herself coffee. Scrolled her phone. Didn't say a word. Until, casually, she asked, "You heading into town today?" "No." "You should. You've been sulking in this house for weeks. Go do something useful. She didn't look at me, and I didn't argue. I grabbed my keys and left, just to breathe air that didn't feel like hers. I didn't go into town. I drove. For hours. No destination. Just miles and radio static. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. Celine, want to get lunch? Just to talk. There were a dozen reasons I should have said no. But I didn't. Because when your own wife can't be bothered to look you in the eye, and her best friend does, it starts to feel like attention is oxygen. And I was suffocating. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. One of those places with too many plants and not enough lighting. Celine was already seated. Tight black sweater. Red lipstick. Not the casual look of a friend dropping in to check on you. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't pretend to make small talk. She leaned in and said, "She's cruel to you. And she doesn't even hide it anymore." I blinked. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because I used to think you could handle it. I used to think you were just playing the long game. But now I see you breaking." I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her, jaw tight, fists balled under the table. And then she said it, softly, but with the precision of a scalpel. "She doesn't respect you. But I still do." That sentence broke something open in me. Not lust. Not longing. Something deeper. Recognition. The kind you don't realize you've craved until it's handed to you in perfect words. I didn't act on it. Not yet. But in that moment, the scales tipped. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like Lyra's problem. I felt like someone else's opportunity. I didn't tell Lyra about lunch with Celine. I could lie and say it was because I didn't want to start a fight, but that's not true. The truth is, I didn't think she'd care. And worse, I didn't think she'd notice. That silence between us had grown so loud, it became normal. The kind of quiet where you stop asking each other where you've been, not because of trust, but because you just don't matter to each other anymore. The next few days were strange. Lyra started acting lighter, more playful. Not with me, God no, but with the rest of the world. Suddenly, she was posting pictures again, laughing in stories, commenting flirty emojis under her coworkers' beach selfies. And when I asked her about it, she just said, "Relax. It's harmless." But it wasn't harmless. Nothing is when the foundation is cracked. Meanwhile, Celine kept texting me. Not aggressively. Just small things. Observations. Soft concern. Screenshots of old memes we used to laugh at. I knew what it was. I knew where it could lead. But it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like someone offering a ladder while I drowned in concrete. Then came Friday night. Lyra said she had a painting retreat with a few colleagues and would be gone overnight. I offered to drive her. She laughed. "Why? So you can sulk in the car the whole way?" I didn't answer. Just watched her stuff a bag full of clothes I'd never seen before. Lace and satin and silk and skin, and felt something twist in my stomach. When she left, the silence was unbearable. And that's when I did something I didn't plan. I invited Celine over. It wasn't for anything. That's what I told myself. Just company. Just someone to talk to who didn't look through me like I was wallpaper. She arrived in jeans and a hoodie, no makeup, hair in a messy knot. Halfway through the second glass, I told her everything. Not just about Lyra. About me. About how I felt like a background character in my own life. About how I'd stopped recognizing my own voice when I spoke. Celine didn't interrupt. Didn't offer advice. She just listened. Really listened. And when I finally stopped talking, she looked at me with this expression, like someone who'd stumbled onto something fragile and was afraid to breathe too hard. "You didn't deserve this," she said. "And it's not your fault for needing warmth." Then she reached across the couch and held my hand. That's all. Just that. But it was the most physical affection I'd felt in nearly a year. And yet, even as her fingers laced into mine, a sickening guilt started growing in my chest. Because for the first time in this entire mess, I didn't feel numb anymore. I felt alive. And that terrified me more than anything. The next morning was quiet in the way hotel rooms feel after checkout, like everything meaningful had already happened and no one bothered to clean up the emotion. Celine had fallen asleep on the couch, fully clothed, blanket over her knees, hands still loosely hanging where mine had been. I watched her breathe for a few seconds longer than I should have, not because I felt romantic about her, but because she looked peaceful in a way I couldn't remember ever seeing in Lyra anymore. I made coffee, burned the toast, thought about sending Lyra a text asking how the retreat was going. I didn't. She didn't send anything either. No good night. No, made it safe. Nothing. Just this dead air between us that had started to feel like our real marriage. Celine left around 9 a.m. No kiss. No weird tension. Just a soft, thanks for last night, that lingered more in tone than in meaning. I think we both knew it was a line neither of us could afford to cross without everything collapsing. But still, something had shifted. When Lyra returned the next evening, she smelled different. Not like her usual vanilla and paint. More like hotel soap and artificial berry shampoo. I don't know why that bothered me more than anything. Maybe because I knew what hotel she used to mock for having that exact brand. Or maybe because it was proof. Proof she'd packed for a performance. And I hadn't even been invited to watch. She didn't hug me. Didn't sit near me. Just unpacked slowly, humming some unfamiliar tune while I sat at the kitchen table pretending to read emails. Finally, I asked, "Did you have a good time?" She turned halfway. "Yeah. Productive." "Learned anything new?" She shrugged. "Not really." She didn't ask about my weekend. She never did. And I didn't volunteer anything. Not about the loneliness. Not about Celine. Not about how, when I woke up that morning and realized I wasn't missing Lyra at all, it scared me more than her absence ever had before. 3 nights later, we were at another group gathering. Different crowd. Same tension. This time, it was board games and whiskey. Lyra was loud, too loud. Performing again. Her laugh was 3 seconds delayed and always a decibel too high. Celine was there too, sitting across from me. Not flirty. Not distant. Just watching. Like she knew something no one else at the table did. And then it happened again. Someone joked about couples switching places for a night to see who had it harder. And Lyra, without missing a beat, raised her glass and said, "Honestly, I'd switch with anyone. Just for a night of real feedback." Everyone laughed. Except Celine. Except me. She said it like she was dying to test that theory. And she looked at me after she said it, daring me to flinch. But I didn't. I didn't look away either. And that's when Celine broke the silence. "I'm game." It was a joke. Maybe. But her eyes didn't blink when she said it. And for the first time, Lyra didn't laugh. She just stared. At her best friend. Then at me. And something passed between the three of us that didn't belong in public. That was the moment I realized I wasn't the only one walking a line anymore. After that night, things between Lyra and Celine grew colder. On the surface, anyway. They still texted, still posted fake happy selfies, still tagged each other with inside jokes. But when they were in the same room, the energy shifted. Celine had stopped trying to mask her glances. And Lyra? She started treating her like a threat instead of a friend. But she never confronted her. Not once. As if doing so would confirm something she didn't want to admit. One evening, I came home to find Lyra in the backyard, smoking, a habit she'd dropped years ago. I stood in the doorway, watching her light the cigarette with trembling fingers. She didn't notice me. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. "I saw Celine today," I said quietly. She didn't look at me. So, we had coffee. She wanted to talk. "Did you sleep with her?" The question came out flat, like she was asking if I bought milk. "No," I said, but it didn't feel like a defense. It felt like a confession. Because the truth was, I'd wanted to, and she could hear it in my voice. She finally turned around. Her eyes were calm, but her mouth curled into that same weaponized smile she used when she knew she was losing ground. "You'd disappoint her too, you know." I should have walked away, but I didn't. I just stared back and said, "Maybe, but at least she'd be honest about it." For a second, something broke behind her eyes. She opened her mouth like she had a comeback ready, but nothing came out. And then she laughed. One dry, empty breath. "You really think she's interested in you? She's bored, Marek. Just like me." She turned, walked back inside, and left the cigarette burning on the edge of the table. That was the moment I stopped hoping she'd change, and started wondering if I would. The first time I knew something had truly shifted wasn't during an argument or a glance across a room. It was when I found the bracelet. A thin silver one with a tiny red stone. Not Lyra's. Not mine. Wedged between the passenger seat and the console of my car. And Celine? She hadn't been in that seat since the cafe. At least, not when I was there. I picked it up and held it between my fingers for a long time. It wasn't expensive, but it was unmistakably hers. I remembered it from that game night, the way it caught the light when she raised her glass. She always wore it on her right wrist. Always. And yet somehow, it ended up in my car. I didn't text her. Didn't accuse. I just waited. 2 days passed. Then a third. Nothing. No messages. Not from her. Not from Lyra either. The whole house felt like it was operating on ghost mode. We crossed paths in silence. Ate at different times. Slept with backs turned and phones glowing under sheets. The slow death of a marriage is never one big explosion. It's crumbs. It's whispers. It's unanswered questions that rot inside you. Then, one night, Celine called. Not texted. Called. Can we talk? She asked, voice tight. I almost said no. I should have. But I agreed. She came over half an hour later, wearing a coat too big for her and makeup that looked like it had been wiped off in a rush. I didn't mean to leave it there, she said the moment she stepped inside. So you were in my car? She hesitated. Yeah. A few days ago. Lyra said she needed help dropping off paintings at the school, but she said she was borrowing your car. Said hers was acting up. I froze. She didn't tell me she was taking my car, I said slowly. Celine blinked. She didn't. I shook my head. Something clicked then. Something I didn't want to believe. Because if Lyra had borrowed my car and brought Celine with her, that meant they'd both been keeping something from me. And if Celine was telling the truth now, then she hadn't even realized she was part of a lie until just now. That's when I asked her the question that had been chewing at my ribs since the night at the wine tasting. Why did you say that? Say what? That you wanted to check for yourself. She stared at me, mouth parted, no words. You weren't joking, were you? I added. Her silence was the answer. Then she said, almost whispering, I thought you needed someone to remind you you're still wanted. I didn't know whether to thank her or scream, because I did feel wanted, but not in the way I needed. I needed honesty, clarity, loyalty, and what I had instead was a storm of games, two women circling each other with knives behind their backs, and me caught between their shadows. And yet, even as I stood there with the bracelet in one hand and 1,000 questions in the other, I still didn't ask her to leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the bracelet on my nightstand like it was evidence in a case I hadn't filed yet. The silence in the house was heavy again, worse than usual. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was something unspoken waiting to detonate. The next morning, I left early. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell Lyra where I was going. I needed air, space, clarity. I drove to a park we used to visit years ago, back when she'd still hold my hand in public. I sat on the same bench we once carved our initials into. The wood was cracked now, weathered, kind of like us. I thought about everything, Celine's half-truths, Lyra's cruelty, my own passivity. I thought about who I'd become, how small I'd allowed myself to shrink just to avoid conflict. And then, for the first time in a long time, I made a choice. I went home, packed a bag, and waited for Lyra to come back from wherever she'd disappeared to. When she saw the duffel by the door, her eyes flicked up without surprise. Going somewhere. Yeah, I said. Out of this fog. She scoffed, but there was no venom left in her. Just a woman who'd burned the bridge she lived on. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't yell. I just walked out with one bag and a sense of something new, self-respect. I got a small place across town. Clean walls. Quiet nights. And slowly, painfully, I started remembering who I was before I let someone erase me. I didn't pursue Celine. I couldn't trust what we were to each other. Not yet. But I did meet someone new at a bookstore a few months later. Someone who asked me questions, laughed without cruelty, and didn't need to break me down to feel tall. Her name's Ilya. She's gentle, sharp, kind. Last weekend, she leaned over during dinner and said, I don't know who taught you to be afraid of your own voice, but they were wrong. And I believed her.